Hey everyone, welcome back to Endless Money Pits. This is my 2016 Honda CBR500R, and today I'll show you how to replace the spark plugs. The procedure is very similar for bikes built between 2013 and 2018, and I'll show you the differences when we get there. Honda recommends replacing the spark plugs every 16,000 miles, and if they go bad, you might have trouble with misfires or getting your bike to start. Removing the fairings can be intimidating, but I'll show you exactly how to do it. Here are the tools that I use for this job. Socket wrench, socket extension, 10mm socket, 5/8 spark plug socket, two 10mm wrenches, electric screwdriver, 5mm hex bit, needle nose pliers, two pairs of bent nose pliers, flathead screwdriver, tiny flathead screwdriver, angled pick, and a spark plug gap gauge. For this job I also needed two spark plugs and two pieces of wood about this size. To start, I put the bike on stands to make it easier to work on. You'll want to replace the spark plugs when the engine is cool to help prevent stripping the threads. From 2016 to 2018, both of the fairings are fastened with 4 screws and 1 plastic pin. On 2013 to 2015 models, the fairings are removed essentially the same way, but with 3 screws and 2 pins, and you'll also need to remove the seat and the side covers first. Here's another angle of the ones that are hard to see. To remove the plastic pins, press in the center, then pry them out or push them out from the back if you can. All the screws can be removed with a 5mm hex. The screws aren't all the same size or shape, so keep track of which hole each one came from. Pull the fairing outward, starting at the rear. Be very careful pulling the fairing from around the windshield area. These clips are very easy to break. The part of the fairing that wraps around the front underneath the headlight needs to be pulled out in the forward direction. Push back on the rubber sleeve to reveal a single electrical connection, which can be disconnected by lifting up on the tab with a tiny flathead screwdriver. Careful not to bump your tripod. Each arrow points to some type of clip that holds the fairing to the bike separate from the pins and screws. The seat is held on with two 5mm screws. My custom seat makes it harder to reach the screws, but it should be easier with the factory seat. Lift the seat from the rear and slide it back, out from under the fuel tank. The side covers on this bike each have 1 screw and 1 pin. We'll be unplugging the bike's computer, so we need to make sure to disconnect the battery first. To gain access under the fuel tank, we'll start by removing these two 10mm bolts. Lift the tank high enough to place the small block of wood under it, and then we'll have to disconnect a few things. Start with the fuel tank vent hose. The fuel overflow hose is next. And finally, this electrical connection on the left side of the tank. I wasn't able to pull it apart without using pliers. Now you should be able to lift the tank high enough to hold it up with the larger piece of wood. In case you were wondering, this fuel tank is completely full and it didn't leak a drop. If you want to remove the tank, you'll need to relieve pressure from the line, disconnect the fuel line quick connection at the tank, and remove this nut and bolt. This is the under tray and the spark plugs are beneath it, so we'll have to disconnect a few things and move it out of the way. First, unplug the ECM. I needed a little help from a flathead screwdriver. I used a tiny flathead screwdriver to help release the rubber ECM housing from its mount. The turn signal relay is held down the same way. Pull down the rubber boot and release the plastic clip. I tried to avoid removing both fairings, but there was no other way to access this area. Remove this 5mm screw and unplug these two connections. Pull the ignition coil wires from the wire guides and unplug the connectors. There's a nut and bolt down here that need to be removed using two 10mm wrenches. I used needle nose pliers to pull the bolt out to make sure I didn't drop it. Remove the 10mm bolt at the top of the tray. Push the turn signal relay wire through the tray. Release the throttle and clutch cables from the cable guide. Reach under the tray and release the wiring harness band clips using bent nose pliers. Push the pair solenoid off its mount and push it down through the tray. I think the tray would have come out at this point, but I was tired and missed one of the band clips, so I just used a bungee cord to hold it out of the way. Pull the spark plug caps up and move them out of the way. You'll need a 5/8 spark plug socket and a long extension to remove the spark plugs. Don't drop your spark plugs. The new spark plug slipped out of the socket too. I think this spark plug socket is so old that the rubber ring inside is dried out, so I'll need to get a new one. Man, that wasn't cool. When I dropped that new spark plug, the electrode bent, so I had to reset the gap with a spark plug gap gauge. These are supposed to come with the right gap from the factory, but it's not a bad idea to double check the gaps on new spark plugs even if you haven't dropped them. You might have noticed that I put some anti-seize on the spark plug threads. Right after filming this, I found out that modern spark plugs come with an anti-seize coating on the threads, so you shouldn't add any. Install the new spark plugs and torque them to 12 foot-pounds. The anti-seize I added changes the torque values, so I just tightened them by feel this time. Snap the spark plug caps back on, and we can start putting the tray back together. push the turn signal relay connection up through the tray. Bring the pair solenoid up and hook it onto the tray. I forgot the little vent hose for the fuel tank and had to go back for it later. Push the throttle and clutch cables back into the cable guide. They're hard to reach, so I used an angled pick like a hook to pull them into place. Reinstall the 10mm bolt at the top of the tray. Carefully reinstall the 10mm nut and bolt on the pair solenoid without dropping them. And be careful not to push out this metal sleeve with the bolt. If you can get a torque wrench in there, the service manual says to torque the nut to 6.3 foot-pounds. Snap the wiring harness band clips back into the tray. Plug in the ignition coil wires, making sure not to mix them up, and route the wires back into the wire guides. Reconnect the two electrical plugs on the left side and install the 5mm screw. Reconnect the turn signal relay and seat it on its mount. Mount the ECM while slipping the orange connectors up into the rubber side covers. And plug in the ECM. When putting the tank back down, make sure none of the hoses or wires get pinched. Reconnect the overflow hose before the tank is all the way down. Then set the tank on the small block of wood and double check that the fuel line is seated. Now plug in the electrical connection and reconnect the vent hose. Remove the wood block and lower the tank completely so we can reinstall the two 10mm bolts. Don't forget to reconnect the battery. Pop the side covers back on and reinstall their pins and 5mm screws. Fully insert the outer pin, then press the center pin until it's flush with the edge. Bring the seat in from the rear so the large plastic tab underneath slips under the fuel tank. Then reinstall the two 5mm screws holding down the rear of the seat. Reinstalling the fairings takes a little patience. First, plug in the electrical connection. Reattach the fairing starting with the front part that fits underneath the headlight. You have to line up this tab while making sure the fairing fits onto the edge of the headlight and clips into the front cowl. You'll see gaps if anything is misaligned or not clipped in all the way. The rest of the fairing pops into place easily. So you have to clip in this part and then kind of pull the rest of it backwards and bend this out like that and then push it on. Screw in the screws, pin in the pins, and we're done. That concludes this week's video. If you like my videos, consider supporting me on Patreon or donating on PayPal. I'm running out of 10mm sockets. As always, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you'd like to see next. And until next time, just keep throwing money at it.
Thank you.